Hello and welcome to another episode of Rustacean Station. I am your host, Alan Wyma, and today I'm with a very special guest. It is Bastian Gruber. For once, I almost thought I was going to mess up your first name. So Bastian Gruber. By the way, no relation to Hans Gruber, as we were just talking about before the show. He is the author of Rust Web Development for Manning Books, and he is also, of course, a software developer. And I brought him on the show to talk about his book. And by the way, we do have a copy of the book to give away to people. And we will be discussing that probably over a tweet later on. But I just want to let you guys know to listen up. And I believe we'll have some kind of way for you to win that. But this is a kind of a little bit of a sponsored episode. But trust me, we're going to have him on anyways. But thank you for Manning for giving us a copy to review and also giving us a copy to give away to our audience. So it's kind of a big thank you to you guys. And anyways, I'm stealing up all your thunder, okay? Bastian, not Hans, Bastian Gruber. It is your turn to kind of quickly introduce yourself and like why are you a good person to talk about Rust web development, right? Let's talk from there.
Hi, so yeah, I'm from Germany, and I currently work at a company called Twilio, which is like a communications backend for the internet. And so I started with Rust about probably 2018, so three and a half years ago. I started like a meetup in Berlin. It's called like the Rust and Tell meetup. And before this, I basically am still a freelance software developer for the past 10, 12 years. So I work in the web for a long time with Node.js, Python, a bit of Go, some Java. And then I joined like the Rust hype train and I got into Rust. I wrote a few blog posts about Rust. And yeah, like why you should listen to me, I would say like never listen to a person. Also, don't listen to me, but I hope I can inspire you or I can maybe teach you a few things. Like my aim is to lower the bar of people who want to go onto the Rust train. Like I want you to help to take the first step into Rust web development. And I think so, yeah. But I guess like we come to like why I wrote the book and how the book is structured later on.
Yeah, I mean, I think the main question I have is, it sounds a little bit mean, like why listen to you, but it's more like why, let's put it this way. How come Manning has decided to work with you for this book, right? What is it like? You know, I'm just kind of curious about how you got noticed and all that.
I think they saw my blog posts. I wrote 2-3 years ago, a bunch of blog posts on dev.to, and they got shared like widely. And I think back then there wasn't a person who was comparing the Rust web development with other popular like Rust or like web environments. So I compared it with Node.js and I showed the differences and I showed in a few steps what you need to think about once you start in Rust and what you don't have, what you currently have in Node.js. And I think the approach was not there because books usually, or programmers, they stay like a bit in their field and they explain like a web framework, but they might not think about a whole community who want to make the shift. And to bridge this gap, I think was quite interesting for them.
Yeah, I mean, using Rust for web development, like I think I looked at this maybe about a year or so ago, and I felt like the community was just not quite there yet, or at least that was kind of the feeling. I think I've seen a lot of people saying that that's just not there yet. And I don't think we're actually 100% there yet, but I think we've definitely leapt. You know, we jumped really huge recently, right?
Yeah.
And it's interesting because now there's more choices. I think originally there was just kind of like Actix Web, and of course at this time Actix Web I think was still running with Actix in the back end. But now you have Warp, and I just talked with Carl about from Tokyo, and they also have something too that they're using. And I think Warp is also built on something from them. Now, of course, not Tokyo only, but something else like Tower or something like that.
They use the HTTP server called Hyper for their HTTP implementation.
Yeah. The weird part about Hyper is usually you have a client and you have a server for HTTP, and each one's a different name, but somehow Hyper does both, and that's part that always kind of tripped me up.
It's true, yeah.
But yeah, so yeah, like what kinds of choices are there? Like if I want to get started in Rust web development and I wanted to choose something, what kinds of choices are there, and what's kind of the positives and negatives of each one?
So I think there is like the major three, I would say, is Actix Web, it's Rocket, and I would still think it's Warp. There's also a new like web framework, also sort of like not from the Tokyo core, but around the Tokyo core, which is called Axum. I don't know if I pronounce it right, which came out a few months ago. And I actually thought about maybe I should pick this for my book now, but I think it's not quite there yet. So I think for now it depends, because the first choice, because like the web environment is so new in Rust, I would look at the projects with the most like manpower behind it. Because if you're a new company or you don't have many Rust experts on your team, you might want to find a community which you can get help from. And I think that Actix Web and Warp have a pretty wide use case. I'm not so familiar with Rocket. I think they just released their async part into the main line. But I haven't really played around with it tons, because I'm just not a fan of using so many, I don't know, like macros, just from the looks of it. But it's probably like a totally fine framework to use. So I would say that you go then, like after you pick a project by the community, like how big it is and how active it is developed, just the style you like to work with. With Actix is more like an actor-based, like framework, which people like. It's hard to say of like what a framework is, because then people say, but you can also do this, but it's not just this. So like I'm always a bit careful of how to describe a project. But I guess it's just like, if it's like the taste you like, you choose it. And I think all have different pros and cons to them based on the design decisions they took. But I can see that Actix Web and Warp and Rocket are in production at bigger companies. So I think that's the like important message, that you're in good company by choosing them.
Actually, I don't know anybody using Rocket in production. I thought they were still kind of saying it's not quite ready, but I haven't looked at it in a while. And I think Rocket was trying to be some kind of batteries included framework, as opposed to all the other ones, which are not, right?
True. Like it depends on how you define company and production. I think I'm quite sure, like I talked to someone at a RustConf, which they used, but just for like a small, I don't know, like microservice. So like it might not be their main stack, but I'm quite sure that people are, like using it in some parts of their stack.
For Rocket.
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting, because like I said, Rocket's kind of like a batteries included kind of thing. Maybe let's talk more about like what you have in your backpack, right? So I heard this really great analogy where basically like a framework is like a backpack, where you kind of have like your everything that you need. Like if I'm going to go camping, then obviously I need my mess kit, my sleeping bag, my tent, etc. Like if you're going to make a Rust web service, what would be inside of your backpack?
So if I would create a new framework, or like which framework and tools?
If you needed to make something that has a database, maybe some server-side templating, just something that's kind of more of a typical side, right? Because usually I think when people build something, they usually have like a bunch of things that they're going to use.
Yeah. So on top of my head, I would use still currently Warp, which is then based on Tokyo. So this is a part of it. I would use the library called Tracing as a logging or tracing library. Then you have Serde, which is your JSON parser or serializer, deserializer. And then it depends on like what you want to build. I'm actually not so familiar with the different templating frameworks because I haven't needed to use them in the past. I saw a few on my meetup. They were presented in the past, but I'm not sure of how actively they are developed. And then for the database, I would currently use SQLx as a SQL layer in Rust to talk to your database.
I'm kind of curious though, because I'm reading a book called From Zero to Production. He's a previous guest on the show, and besides Warp, it sounds like you guys pick everything else the same. He said to use Actix Web. You're saying use Warp. His reason for using SQLx was that about the async, that the async is really worth it. I believe that was his big reason, if I remember correctly. Why would you choose SQLx compared to like Diesel? I always hear talk about Diesel, but not too much about SQLx.
So from the first touches, the SQLx for me seemed a bit slimmer in the integration. I haven't tried Diesel in a year, and then I'm about to start like the database part of the book, so I will go more into like the fully fledged comparison and see, like what I will choose. But for now, the SQLx experience was just like much nicer to integrate into an application. Diesel seemed a bit too, invasive, if this makes sense. And so just from like a feeling, I was more torn towards SQLx.
I think also Diesel has their own SQL language, right? Or their own language to deal with it, because it's really an ORM. And it seems like right. ORM have kind of like a bad rap within the last few years.
Because, there's stuff done in the background. And if you don't do like the naming right or stuff like this, and I'm not a fan of these types of like layers. I rather, like write an SQL query in my like Rust code than use an ORM.
Yeah, but the only thing is that then you have to make sure you write the right SQL and everything else. I really like the way that Elixir has this library called Ecto, and I think that one's pretty good, where you can use a SQL-like query syntax. Have you ever used LINQ before?
No, never.
Okay. It's very like the language is like a very SQL-like language, and it's pretty easy to kind of convert between the two. Okay. It's a good mixture in my opinion. But the one thing I don't like about SQLx is like you have to have like your database ready and like available. So like when you compile your app, it has to like actually check the queries, which is good for type safety, right? But not so fun if when you write it and maybe didn't do some things.
That's very true. I'm just my thinking is always like, what if it breaks in production? How fast can I figure out like what's wrong? And I feel like I'm faster if I read the SQL like myself and can reason about it than to hope that Diesel did the right thing in the background, which it might, but it's another black box. I have to think maybe there is something wrong there. So I rather have like a transparent view into my stack.
Yeah, this is true. It's funny that they say it like that because that's really the Rust way of thinking, right? Oh, I'd rather have my stuff be broken locally than if I ever deploy it and something bad goes wrong. It's kind of interesting the way you said that.
Yeah, I guess I'm just burned by like the years and years of Node.js development where there's like a magic library for almost everything. But if something breaks, it's really, really hard to figure out where was the problem. And this was also like one of the major reasons why I moved to Rust, because I didn't want to have this in my day-to-day.
So how has your experience been? Actually, this is a really great question. So Node.js has been a very powerful and favored choice for people to build web services in. How do you feel about your experience coming from Node.js now to Rust, where Rust is kind of a little bit more wild, wild west out there? But at the same time, now, of course, it's settling in. Like, do you feel that you made the right choice, or you're just not quite there yet, or what's your thoughts?
That's a complex question. I'm a German, so how to explain this? So I like that Rust is not quite there yet, because sometimes people, they want to choose a different language, but what they mean is just they don't want to have the problems of the old language and just want to have a different syntax. I like that in Rust I have to think more for myself, and I'm more exposed to the underlying layers. But I think I saw like Rust that maybe if it's succeeding, then you have sort of like a middle path. You don't have a C style where you're, like where you get like no help by the compiler, but you also don't have a Node or Java experience where the stuff is always taken care for you. And it's sort of like to find a middle ground. And I think for this, a few libraries are not there yet. It's not as like popular yet in the broader ecosystem, but it's getting there. I saw like a few projects in the past, but then they got abandoned. So I hope that at some point there will be a nice to use ecosystem. And I think that Axum actually surprised me, because I saw this like what I wanted. I saw the right abstractions, and I could pull in some tower services, the sort of like the Lego block idea of putting things together, but I don't have to put them together. So I think it's getting there, but it's not quite there yet.
Let's kind of talk a little bit more about your background, right? So you went to school also for computer science or something else?
Yeah, so I did a bachelor in computer science. Yeah, but like I started like to develop my own like web applications like with a neighbor of mine. I was, I think, 16 or 17, and he did currently like a business bachelor, and he saw, hey, like, but with this neighbor, and he earns like $500 with this shitty website. I think that we can do this too. And I saw like the website and said, yeah, like they are not good. So let's try to do the same thing, but better and cheaper. And we tried, and this sparked the fun in me, because then we went into smaller companies, and then you're 16 and they trust you like with their business website, and then they pay you like the money on your bank account, which was, I don't know, like way more than I earned in my job back then. So I did an apprenticeship as an electrician, and then I decided I need to study this stuff. Like this is so much fun and it's good money, so I want to be part of this. So, and then I studied computer science, and then I went on to find my first jobs.
Okay. That's pretty interesting that you had this kind of business sense from a while back. So right now you're actually, you're working at Twilio, and like, what do you actually do at Twilio?
So the role is called a solutions architect, where the idea is, and exactly like what I did when I was 16, to be a bit of a bridge between the technology and the company, with the focus on the technology part. So if a bigger, larger corporation and they want to build their own, like video platform or their call center platform, or they want to integrate their push notifications if they deliver a package, and they want to use the Twilio APIs, but I have no idea how to start such a project, of how to handle it, of how to think about it. And then they call the professional services part of Twilio. And then, like we come in and we help them from a business, but also from a technology side, and help them to draw some diagrams, to think through the problems, and to propose a first running project of like what to use and which technology they might be able to use, and how to structure their teams, and help also like with the ins and outs of the Twilio APIs.
So how often are you pushing Rust to these customers? Just curious.
Actually, not so much, because like most APIs from Twilio are not there yet. They release, I think, that might be soon there, sort of like an open API generator. And then I think then is the point where you can use also different languages. Now they have the standard languages for like Node.js and Java and Python, but Rust is not there yet. So there I have to talk a bit more from a business perspective from Twilio. And I can't talk. And I was a freelancer back then, and I would have pushed a bit more for Rust. But as an employee, I'm in a different position. I'm not as free.
Okay, I see. Okay, so I am kind of curious, and I believe in Berlin, Rust is actually really, really popular. Is that so?
Yeah, I think the first Rust Fest was started here. The first like people who organized like the meetups and the conferences are in Berlin. Mozilla was big in Berlin, or still is. So this was sort of a Rust hub. Yeah, and I think it still is.
Are you also actively involved in the communities over there too?
So I run this meetup. I started this meetup Rust and Tell 3 years ago, and I still do this. I had a meetup last week, and we had a bit of a break. But since I have 2 kids now, it's hard to find time. But I try to make the time for these meetups every now and then. But yeah, like my time is quite constrained now with getting too much involved in the community.
No, I think your time is constrained because you're currently actually on leave at the moment, right?
Right. So I'm on parental leave for a year, and I needed this time because I figured I can't have 2 kids and a job and write a book and don't have my life to fall apart. So I decided I take a year off and can focus on the family and on the book, so that the book is actually soon to be done.
That's good. Like, how soon are we talking for the book to be ready? Because I started reading it. I think I got to the first one. I think only 3 chapters at the time were out.
I think now the first 4 are out. The 5th is about to be released, and the 6th chapter is currently, let's say, finished. It's going through some internal reviews, and I'm starting the chapter 7 soon. So I hope I can pick up the speed in the next few weeks. I hope that by the end of the year, starting next year, January, February, that the writing process is done. But it's hard to say because I had to cancel like a whole chapter in the past where I digged too deep into like a topic, and the first reviews of the book said, this is not like why we want to buy the book. And then just 30 pages were gone. And so I don't know if this will happen again, but you never know.
So what's actually your writing process when you write the book? Because I've heard some people say basically every day I just force myself to write for 3 hours a day or 1 hour a day or something like that. Like, what's your kind of process?
I tried different ones. So the most process I did was, again, I took 2 weeks off and I didn't go on vacation, but I blocked 5 hours each day to write the book. And I sort of write in like motivation streams. I constantly write a book in my head, under the shower, on the couch. I constantly think about the book. But if I write every day, even if the words are not good, it's not good. I have to delete half of it again because like the flair is not there. And I try to write the book as I would try to convince a friend to use like Rust, and I try to have a conversation in my head like with them. So if I write about like the web framework, I ask myself like, what if the friend is going to read this book? Like, which questions do I need to answer to them? So I try to be in this super like motivational state to convince them that this is the right choice and answer them the right questions they might have at this point in the book. And for this takes quite a lot of energy. So I try to write to not to have this negative feeling in my head to creep up too much. But then I try to have a coffee at the right time in the day and just to write for 2 or 3 hours. I'm more of a person who doesn't do much for 3 weeks, and then it has to come out on a Tuesday night at 10 p.m. and then I write for until in the morning. It's just more like it builds up, and then it has to get out. And so it's not very healthy or structured, but yeah, I can't work or like I can't like write like this where I just like make a bit of a progress each day.
Okay, I see. It's interesting. How about having 2 kids, right? Does that ever put a damper in your writing schedule?
Yeah, for sure. It's hard since like the nights are not good. So you lack the energy in the morning, and also your time is constrained since they have strict, I don't know, like bad times and stuff. Yeah, it's not helpful, but in a way, I actually started all of these blog posts and stuff like when my daughter was just 2 months old, and I was on paternity leave there too for half a year. or like around like the times, I don't know, 17, 18. And I thought like she can't do much. And in half a year, she's able to crawl and then she can talk and she does it all. And I felt like motivated. And I thought like if she can go from like nothing to walking and I'm talking, then I'm able to learn this language and like use it. And this is also the mindset I try in the book, is like a person who is motivated to learn something should get the right tools to do it. And this is sort of also, like the mindset for the book. And what I do is I want to help people do stuff they want to do and remove the barrier. Basically, as a parent, like you don't have to teach them much. You just have to give them the right toys at the right moment, and their brain will go wild and figure it out all by themselves. And this is like what I try also in my day-to-day life with technology.
I'm just thinking about what you're saying, right? And I'm thinking for professionals, giving the right tools makes the most sense, right? You don't want to give a plastic cutlery knife to a world-class chef, right? Mm-hmm. He wants something he can cut with ease or whatever, right? Maybe he has his own style. So I'm thinking like, does Warp actually, I'm just thinking about Warp because it seems like this is the most controversial. It's like, do I use Warp? Do I use whatever? X Web, etc. Now, do you think Warp is actually the most easy one for people to actually pick up web development with compared to other ones too? Or do you just think that this is the best one out there and it's worth kind of going through the going through the learning process to actually get this going?
So this is actually where I decided pro Warp, because in Rocket, for me, this was too much magic behind the scenes with like the macros. And I could be wrong here, and they change, and they will email you now and say, hey, like that's not true. But for me, like Warp was the most amount which got out of my way, and there was not much magic behind it. With Actix back then, when I looked at the framework, this was like the Actor framework, and I thought, why do I need to learn a new way of thinking about like web applications now? I just want to parse an incoming HTTP request and answer it, and maybe add some stuff and have like a middleware. And therefore, the Warp filters for me actually make sense, because you send this incoming HTTP request through a bunch of filters, and then like it ends up at your like route handler. And then you do like a bunch of business logic, and then you send it back. So for me, the filters actually is quite a nice abstraction, because you send an incoming request through the filters, add some data, and then you can work with it. So I think it's true. I saw like what Exam did, and I think that this is a nicer way for me personally, and I would choose this in a year or two, or maybe half a year. And maybe like the book is going to be updated like at some point. But I think that Warp is a good choice for people to start.
Okay.
Because like you don't have to touch the macros from like Rocket. If you're completely new to Rust, you don't want to think about like what is a macro. And you use them like a bit, but you don't want to get too much involved yet, because this might scare you, since there are so many topics like strings and maybe lifetimes and all of this stuff, which you have to relearn.
Yeah, and I think the filtering is kind of interesting. I know there's another way to do it. Basically, when I look at when it's going through the book and what I'm doing right now in the other book, I feel like same framework but different language. It's almost like the same language but different dialect when I kind of see it. You feel the same? Yeah.
And also, like, I think I bought the book, or I read parts of the book of the 0 to 1 or the 0 to production. And I looked at like how he's using like the framework and how it looks like and stuff. And it's just a different taste of the start. And I also say in the book, and I compared it to if you go on a large like road trip, if your friend lives in the next city, but you all, I don't know, like meet in the city 200 miles away. You have a different start. Like the first way out out of the city might look a bit different, but then on the highway, it's the same way. And I feel like with most of the web frameworks it's the same, because you just see the framework basically maybe in your like routes RS or main RS file, but then the business logic is basically like agnostic to the web framework you use. So it actually doesn't have such a big impact on your application later on.
Okay. So is there any other frameworks that you're kind of watching that maybe are not production ready that you think could be interesting to use?
I looked a lot into, I don't know how to pronounce it, Tide, which I think had a lot of taste from the Node.js like vibes and was easy to use and it felt nice. But then it was, I think, the lack of being in production by bigger companies and didn't have the largest community behind it for me to be able to recommend it in a book like this. But from the syntax and from the style and the API, I think this would have been my first choice.
Okay. I do want to ask you this question, right? Because like we talked about before, web development with Rust is kind of still new. How did you actually learn your current like patterns of how you structure your code and which services to pull in that helped you to write this book?
So I've worked in a company previously called Kraken, which is a crypto exchange company. And they had a bigger like Rust team there, like with tons of experienced people. And I learned like most of my production like Rust there. And then I went through companies who had open source projects. And then I went through their code bases and looked how do they structure their code and how do they handle it. But I think it's also important to know that it has to make sense for your applications and business use case. It's always the case. I worked in projects where as a freelancer, I came in and the code was in between like 10 different files, and where I thought this code, like it doesn't change much. It's easier to reason about it if it's just in 2 or 3 files. Some companies are having much, much bigger complex applications, and then a different structure, I don't know, like makes sense. I think it's just good to know, since the feedback from the people I talked to was they started their first project and they tried to figure out of how to split the code into files and how can they actually like address a function in a different file. Just an easy question. And people told me they read through like the Rust programming language book and they tried to figure out how to do this and they still couldn't do it. And I tried to explain it in a super simple way, like of how to do it, like basically in 3 lines of sentences and with graphs and stuff. And once you know of how it feels like and how to split it, you basically probably have like a structure of your like routes or like your route handlers and your like models types. It's probably always like once you build a type, you have some traits onto this type. You have the struct. This is like one file, and all of these files can live in one folder. And then I think in bigger companies, it just makes sense to share these types of folders as maybe like a crate for different projects. And then you pull the types in you need. The same maybe with like a database abstraction. And this is actually quite nice, where like Rust was the first language, even in my toy projects, sort of forced me to exclude this code from my base repository and build our own crate, because it just felt so natural to build a struct and have the traits. And then you see, oh yeah, like this lives completely by itself. And I might be able to use this type and with these traits in other projects in the future. And this was the first language which like naturally forced me to think like this.
But coming from Node.js, right, you're not worried about left pad with this kind of thing, where if you have a package and everything depends upon it and whatever happens, then you'll be in big trouble, right?
Yeah, but then I think if like the libraries are small enough, I probably can rebuild it, or I didn't need it in the first place. I just build it like myself and don't pull it in. I found that Rust So this is like self-written projects, and I've found that people use much less third-party libraries in Rust than they use in Node.js. And I think this is because people build more stuff by hand. And this was also the reason why I recommend people to use Rust, because you gain more knowledge. Like, it's not just to write a new, or like to write a code in a new language. It's more about, you have to learn more about the stack. And once you learn about it, it's actually also always the same. It might be complex in the beginning, but people just know the stuff because they did it in the past. And once you did it like once or twice, I don't need tons of third-party code. I can just, like write the stuff myself.
But that could also be quite dangerous too, right? You write your own parser for something and you don't do it properly, and then you could really cause problems.
Yeah, it's always a balance act. I guess people have to learn by themselves of like when to fall down and pull themselves up and don't do the same mistake again. Some people learn by mistake and some people learn by reading books. I'm the type of person who learns by mistakes. Like, I have to burn like my hand, and some people just like read a book about heat and no, they don't touch the stove. So I guess it's a learning process in a different way.
That sounds a little bit scary for your current job if you're advising people how to scale their software properly.
And I mean, I've been now as a freelancer for 5 years. I probably worked in 10, 15 different companies now at the solutions architect role. I have insight in so many different companies and tech teams. I know that you will make mistakes. I know that you don't do the right thing like at some point. Just make sure that like once you break something, it breaks in the smallest way possible, and then you move on. You can't make a perfect software, especially not in the beginning.
That sounds like some great advice to give to beginners. Just like, don't fret. You're not going to do it right the first time, but learn from your mistakes.
Yeah, and I had this problem like the first time I worked with really experienced people, and I was in awe, and I thought I will never, reach this level. And I questioned like myself, like, what did they do in the past? And then I went back and I looked at them and I saw like the talks they gave, and I saw, okay, like they just do this stuff for 10 years. If they wouldn't be this good, then they would have wasted all their time. They're obviously this good because they put this much time into their craft, and this is why they're good. So at some point, just start and get better and wait 10 years, and then you reach the same level, maybe.
Yeah, this is true. Practice definitely helps, and experience is the biggest one.
Yeah.
Let's go back to actually talking about Rust, right? So, after your experience with different languages, I mean, you're advising people right now and they're not really using, or they can't really use Rust for interfacing with Twilio. I mean, like, when do you think Rust is a good solution compared to other languages out there?
So I think the current limitation is your own skills and how fast you need to have something implemented. And when I say there are no APIs from Twilio, I know companies who just talk to the plain API and build their own like library around it. If this takes too long for you, then like Rust might not be the best choice, because you need to step up your game a little bit or like a lot. So I recommend it to developers because the next 10 years in software development will be this easy as it is now. It won't be as easy to get the same amount of money because it's just getting more complex. So I say step up your game and learn like Rust because it's a future. You basically invest in your future. If you can't do it now for a company, maybe don't do it because you got hired to do a job, and before you break a contract, use the tools you're familiar with. But then take 2 months after this project and try to build the same stuff in Rust. And once you can do this, use Rust. I don't see a reason why you should use Node instead of Rust. I don't see a reason why you should use Go in a web context. You might have to, there are not as many libraries, I don't know, like yet, but just a type system and a compiler by themselves are worth the switch. This is just so much added benefit that it's hard to argue against it. If you have already like a huge Go stack and you are an experienced Go developer, sure, like there's like nothing wrong like with Go. Just use Go. But I think that Rust has a potential for yourself in the future, and jump on the train while it's still not too big.
Okay, some pretty powerful advice. I don't think I've met a German who's so fully opinionated about something like that before. Usually they're pretty much, okay, you do what you want, but now it's like, no, you should do this, and that's it.
It's sometimes you get the feeling, and I had this a few, like 2-3 times in my life, like where I see something and I thought, now it's the time to switch. And the press says, no, like it's wrong, it's the wrong thing to do. But you see the people who do the switch and there's something behind this. And it's getting bad press and it's getting talked down, but like the base facts. And I see the process and I could see the same traction and the spirits and the people. This has a future. It might take a while, which is good because then you have some time to learn. It's so easy now to get a Rust job. Like just say that you want to learn the language, show a few side projects, and you got a job. People say, that there are not enough jobs out there, but you have to expose yourself and say, hey, I'm willing to learn this language. This is my current stack. Please find me Rust jobs. I did this, and the interesting part is I did this with the recruiters 3 years ago. They wanted to offer me like Node.js projects, and I said, no, I just do Rust now. And like 90% asked me, what is Rust? I don't know about this language. We definitely don't have Rust. And now I opened my LinkedIn inbox like 2 days ago, and I think I had like 10 offers from recruiters to have like Rust freelance projects. So in 3 years, things changed quite fast. You just have to be bold and say, this is my stack now, and you actively try to get something.
I can't agree more. I mean, I've been investing heavily into Elixir, and I haven't gotten as many offers as you, but I've gotten at least 2 so far, and they just say, hey, we see you're out there in the community and we're interested to work with you. And I think that's pretty powerful.
The world is quite small. Like you might think, it's so many different companies, but word gets around so fast, and you just have to raise your hand and wait until it hits you. It's like it can happen quite fast.
I think so. This is kind of in relation to your current question, or your current topic right now is like, I mean, I actually have the same one too. I say I do Elixir, I do Rust, I do Dart with Flutter. And basically all recruiters out here say I've never heard of those things in my entire life, which is kind of interesting. And so, so my question is like, how can we, like, let's say that we decided that we're going to start working with Rust and we're going to be like freelancing or something, right? How do we compete or stand out to other people who have more popular tech, right? Like, oh, this guy does Rust, or sorry, this guy does JavaScript, this guy does Java, this guy does C, or he does X, right? How can we say, how can we make ourselves stand out more?
So I think there are 2 answers. It's a bigger topic because the question is, how do you find clients and how do you work with clients? I joined companies in the past as a Node developer because this is all like they hired 10 people and I was part of it. So there's no point in saying I want to do it in Rust. The CTO or the architect, they said, this is like the tech stack and we do it in this way. So I say to be part of these projects, but then build a microservice in your language in Rust or in your favorite language and say, look, like these are the advantages. And then just leave it like this. It's just being nice to strangers on the street. These people you will like work with in your day-to-day, they will come across a person who is looking for a Rust developer. Or like they see, we face this problem and now we read like a lot about like Rust again. Maybe talk to this person. I had this once where I'm part of the freelance community and I also told him, hey, like I'm doing like Rust, please find me Rust companies. And he laughed and said, I have no idea like what you're talking about. And like half a year ago, I got an email from them And like they said, hey, like we talked to a company, they want to build a new project. They try to build it in C++, but I told them that like Rust might be like a better choice and they should talk to you about it. And then I had a new lead. So I think it's more of a just be bold and say like what you think. And then this will get around. But yeah, like don't like neglect your current income flow or your current projects. If you know that there are like enough Go projects, do go and get your income and feed your family and your friends or something. But in these projects, hold a little, I don't know, like Rust meetup. Build a little Rust prototype to do like a hackathon in Rust, and then show them, and then just leave. Those people will come back because like Rust is so powerful and good, it will hit them, and then they have your name in their head, and then they will come back to you. I think this is a choice, and how to stand out of them. I think it's just to prove that the same work they do in your language of choice is a better choice. If it's not, then it might be feedback for you that you use the language in the wrong context and you might want to switch. But if it's actually like a valid point you're making, it's easy to prove it by just building the same stuff in a different language. And this should be proof enough, and they will come back to you for sure.
Okay, that's pretty solid advice. I don't think I have any more questions to ask you. I mean, we think we went through basically everything that I wanted to say. Is there anything that you wanted to bring up?
I guess with the beginners, since I'm also in these circles of like the freelancers, and they do their projects and they hear about like Rust and they think this might be not for me, or like that's a fancy language. I would say that Rust is for the first time a different language. It's and it's used, and try to play with it for a few weeks. It's, or like I say, like it's like it moves up your like you're like it, or like it moves you up in a higher salary bracket, even if you don't use the language. Try to build the same stuff from scratch you do now in Go, in Rust, and write it all by hand. And just in this learning process, you're already such a better, or like a better programmer, or like a more broad skilled programmer, which like let you solve a problem in the future in a different and maybe better way. And this alone will like make you stand out in the crowd. So just by doing this on the side will increase your future proof and your salary.
Yeah, it's a good point. I always hear that people who pick up Rust and then go to other languages end up being much better at the language that they go after that. And I can imagine, especially if you go from Rust to C++ or C, right? Because it's a totally different way of structuring your code.
Yeah. Just do stuff. just get out there and do stuff.
So true. Anything else you wanted to mention, or maybe you want to plug your book one more time?
Yeah, feel free to buy the book. I think it's good. And about the book, like it's not like this book is not meant to teach you the perfect way of writing Rust. I think your last guest, who writes like John, who writes like the Rust for Rustaceans, I think is the book called. I bought it last week. This is probably like the book to buy if you want to learn a better way to write like Rust code. My book is about a practical introduction into Rust. Like it's for you, if you look for a Rust job in a web environment, buy this book and read it, and you will be better than prepared for your new job. Or if you're like a CTO and you want to hire like a bunch of people, give them this book and they will be onboarded by themselves, just like with the book. Like it covers it in a very practical, hands-on way. There's no fancy words. There's no abstract thinking. I explain it, all the important pieces. And this is where I come from, and this is what I want to give back to the community.
Okay, that's awesome. Yeah, like I said, I definitely bought the book. I wish I didn't buy it because Manning offered a review copy for me after I bought it. but it's okay. I'm happy to support you because I know you get a couple. You don't get a lot of money; you get a couple bucks. So enjoy your coffee from me.
Thank you.
And again, great work. And I have no problem to purchase your book because I think it's well worth it. I want to support people who are putting material together for the community. Basically, every single piece of material that I think is anyway useful for Rust, at least, I buy right away because I'm really interested in this topic, and I want there to be more things.
So
yeah. Everything I see with Rust, I just buy it.
Yeah, and, just buy and try to support it. Yeah,
exactly. So I'm happy that you're putting effort to this, and I think this is good. I was curious if you actually looked at the Zero to Prod book from Luca before.
I looked at it, and I think I actually started to write my book, and then I saw this and thought, oh, like this person has the same idea as me. So like I read through some parts. I think like they differ like a bit in the style and the way to approach the things. So I'm happy that it's not just a copy of the book. But I like the book. Like I learned like a few things from the book, and I will purchase this as soon as it's done. I think he was on your show, and he mentioned that he hopes that he's done by the end of the year, but who knows? But like once this is done, I'm gonna buy this book for sure. Great book.
Yeah, fantastic. I think your book is pretty good too. So once I finish his, I'll probably, well, at the rate I'm going right now, I'm guessing by the time I finish his book, your book will be published and out for a year with my current read speed. Yeah, again, thanks for the time. I really appreciate it. I'm sorry to take away from well, I'm sorry, or should I not be sorry to get you some time away from your family? I don't know.
Both. It's good to get a break every now and then.
It's true. And I appreciate your time. Maybe we can have you back on the show once you finish the book to kind of talk about, because things may change, right?
Yeah.
So to talk about kind of the finer pieces.
Yeah.
Otherwise, yeah.
Well, thanks for having me.
No problem. Thank you so much for joining us.